أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والضحى والليل إذا سجى ما ودعك ربك وما قلى وللآخرة خير لك من الأولى ولسوف يعطيك ربك فترضى ألم يجدك يتيما فآوى ووجدك ضالا فهدى ووجدك عائلا فأغنى فأما اليتيم فلا تقهر وأما السائل فلا تنهر وأما بنعمة ربك فحدث صدق الله العلي العظيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين سيما بقية الله في الأرضين. ربي اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. Dear brothers and sisters, respected elders, wherever you are, Assalamu alaykum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. My sincerest condolences to all the believers out there in this very, very painful night. And I'd also like to start by thanking the honorable organizers of this event and thanking all those who have joined us, even though it's very, very late. Our discussion tonight is going to be a threefold discussion. The first part of what we're going to be talking about is the importance of intellectually comprehending Islam. So, what is Islam and how do we intellectually comprehend it? The second part is beliefs of the enemies who were present in Karbala, and what were those beliefs that they held, and how did those beliefs contribute to their downfall and to their being damned and cursed. And thirdly, what were the beliefs of the Hosani camp? And we're going to explore that through a brief comparison between the beliefs of the Kufans and comparing that to the beliefs of the Husainis. So first of all, the importance of intellectually comprehending Islam. First, we're going to shed some light on just how important it is to intellectually comprehend Islam. And by this, I mean that we need to really dissect all of our beliefs and filter out those beliefs that we hold in our hearts, which are actually not a part of Islam. Now, first of all, to demonstrate just how much significance and importance Allah and the Ahlul Bayt and the prophets have given to the idea of intellect, I'd like to share a very incredible hadith with you today. Adam alayhi salam, the very first human being, was approached by Angel Jibreel. And the angel said that there are three things that Allah is presenting to you now: aql, intellect; morality; and iman, faith. And Allah says you should choose only one of these. Adam chooses aql, the intellect. And when he was asked, why did you choose intellect? Morality is important. Morality is very important. Iman, faith. Where would we be without our faith? We need faith. But he chose aql. Why did you choose aql, O Adam? He says, wherever aql goes, wherever the intellect goes, Iman and morality go with it. They follow the intellect. And we're going to come back to this idea. The Quran says something very important when it comes to our faith. It says that when the prophets came to people with the message, told them this is the truth, this is what Allah says, this is the reality behind Allah, the people said, بَلْ نَتَّبِعُ مَا وَجَدَنَا عَلَيْهِ آبَاءَنَا. Rather, we shall follow that which we found our forefathers upon. We need to go back to our beliefs and really dissect, dear brothers and sisters, find out which parts of our beliefs we're simply following because our parents or because our forefathers were following those things. If the reason for why we believe in a certain thing is because my parents did this and therefore I'm doing it, that's not good enough. That is the same argument used by the polytheists in the Quran. It is the same argument which Christians will use, which Jews will use, which Hindus will use, Buddhists will use. What makes you different as a Muslim? The thing that makes you different should be the intellect. You see, religions out there, they often say, in fact, most of the time, I think it's safe to say, they will tell you to believe first and then intellectually comprehend. In other words, first believe something and then scour the books and find those things through which you can prove your belief. And many a times as Muslims, this is what we fall into doing. This is the trap that we fall into. We first form our beliefs and then we go to the books, we go to the Quran, we go to the Ahadith in order to prove that initial belief that we already had. Islam doesn't tell us to do this. In fact, Islam, with the utmost emphasis, tells us to do the very opposite. It tells us to first intellectually come to a rational argument and then bring faith upon that thing. This is why the Quran, when you go to it, what does it say? It says over and over again, أَفَلَا تَتَفَكَّرُونَ? Do you not think? أَفَلَا تَتَدَبَّرُونَ? Do you not ponder and contemplate? أَفَلَا تَعْقِلُونَ? Do you not rationalize? The religion of Islam, the foundation of it, dear brothers and sisters, is the rationale. We have to base everything on this. Sometimes what will happen is you'll be in a debate with somebody because it's natural for us to go and challenge certain beliefs that we have. But in the process of challenging those beliefs, people sometimes get angry. This anger sometimes is a sign that they haven't themselves rationally come to the arguments which they now believe in. And so when you're challenging those arguments, they don't have the appropriate arguments to fight back, and that makes them angry. Often this will happen when you're arguing. Sometimes it's with your own parents, sometimes it's with uncles and aunties, sometimes it's with your friends in school. What's important to note is that the Quran has beautifully illustrated for us that these types of mentalities have been highlighted. This mentality, and sometimes what the anger, what it will stem from is they will say, how dare you challenge this belief of mine? Are you saying that my parents, everything that they've done their entire lives is wrong? Are you saying that my grandparents and everything that they taught and everything that they lived their lives by is wrong? It's not a rational argument at all. And what they're basically doing is the exact same thing which Fir'aun did. In the Quran, Musa comes to Fir'aun with a rational argument. He comes to Fir'aun and he says that Allah is one, you are not God, and all the rest of it. What does Fir'aun say? فَمَا بَالُ الْقُرُونِ الْأُولَى? He says, but then what about the past generations? Are you saying they're all wrong? Are you saying that they're all going to hell? It's not a rational argument. And so what we need to do, dear brothers and sisters, is search for everything that we believe in. Go back, introspect, think to yourself, what do I actually believe? And then one by one, destroy those arguments, or at least try to intellectually destroy them. Imagine your belief system, the religion which you are following, as a house, which is inside your heart. Now, this house is supposed to be built of the pure, white, shimmering, shining diamond bricks which Islam has given to us, the intellect, the rationale has given to us. But sometimes what we find is there is a black brick, or there is a gray brick. There is a brick made of mud. These bricks have no real foundation. They're going to wash away. They're going to burn away, right? And these bricks, what do they belong to? They belong to Christianity. They belong to Judaism. They belong to the society, the culture in which we've been raised in. They belong to aba'ana awwalun. They belong to the forefathers. We just got these things from people and television and sometimes even Maulanas from the mimbars, but they're not based on reality. And we ourselves have not intellectually rationalized them. And therefore, the foundation of our faith is weak. Dear brothers and sisters, do not be afraid of destroying and demolishing that house and rebuilding it brick by brick. Take each set of beliefs that you have. It can be Tawheed, it can be the existence of angels, the existence of Imam Zaman. Take each one of those bricks and think to yourself, thoroughly contemplate over it. Can I intellectually prove this thing to myself? It's not about a feeling, dear brothers and sisters. To say, I feel like this is the right path or this is the right belief to have is not enough. Why? You go talk to the Christians, it's all based on a feeling. I was talking to a Christian convert, a Christian revert. He's now one of our brothers. And he was saying that, look, when I was a Christian, I went to the priests, I went to the father, I said, Father, how can God be three and not one? Father, the priest says to him, listen, son, don't try to intellectually understand this. Rather, it's something that you should understand with your heart. You see, the Christians and the Jews and the Hindus, they all have a feeling. That's not enough. It's really not enough. Let's look at the miracles. And this is another point for us to recognize how important the intellect really is in the religion of Islam. Look at the major miracles performed by prophets of the past. Look at Musa alayhi salam. He parts the sea, the Red Sea. He points at the sky, fire starts to come from the sky. He looks at the river and it turns into blood. His staff turns into a snake. These great miracles, which Musa alayhi salam is famous for. Look at Prophet Isa alayhi salam. He brings the dead back to life. Then we come to Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam, Khatamun Nabiyyin, the seal of the prophets. And while he performed many miracles, and if you go to our sources, he actually performed all the miracles of past prophets. However, if you go and ask any of the scholars, you go and ask the intellectuals of Islam, you ask them, what is the miracle of Islam? They will tell you the Quran. In other words, the miracle of Islam is the rational intellectual discourse which is presented through the immaculate words of the book. Our religion, the miracle of it, is that it presents irrefutable arguments that no matter who you are in the planet, you won't be able to contradict these arguments which Islam presents. That's our miracle, dear brothers and sisters, respected elders. And that's what we should be focusing on. Now, crying. We have to ask ourselves, our connection to Abu Abdullah al-Hussain in these days, our tears are a beautiful thing. One who cries, you know, it is as if heaven has become wajib, and we have such a hadith. But then again, we have to go back and ask ourselves sincerely, are these tears and this emotional attachment that we have to Imam Hussain alayhi salam, enough? Is it really enough? Or no, is there more which is expected from us? Considering that our religion and the foundation of our Deen is actually the intellect. Is it enough to weep, or is Allah and the Ahlul Bayt asking us to rationally comprehend what the movement of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein was really all about? If tears were enough, then think about this. The people of Kufa who abandoned Imam Hussain alayhi salam also shed tears. In fact, if we go to the Maqtal, we will see that even those enemies who were surrounding Imam Hussain alayhi salam and participating in his brutal massacre, even their eyes were full of tears when they looked upon Imam Hussain. So again, I ask the question, is it enough for us to merely have an emotional connection to Imam Hussain alayhi salam? Now, let's move on. Let's talk now about the beliefs of the enemies of Imam Hussain alayhi salam in Karbala. Let's come to Yazid first. Yazid, this is a very fascinating discussion actually. What was Yazid's belief? What did he actually believe? What led him to actually fight the grandson of the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wasallam and order for his brutal massacre? The Quran tells us, لَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي أَحْسَنِ تَقْوِيمٍ ثُمَّ رَدَدْنَاهُ أَسْفَلَ سَافِلِينَ. We created man in the best, the most perfect make, and then we rendered him the lowest of the low. There's a reason why you and I are fascinated by horror movies, why we get fascinated when we hear about certain case studies of people who have no kind of feelings. They're psychopaths, they're sociopaths. They can torture another human being and not feel anything but pleasure. It fascinates the human being to study such psychologies. And so when we look at Yazid, first of all, what was the upbringing of this man? What was the upbringing? What kind of environment was he raised in? If we go and look at the history, it's interesting to see that he was actually raised by Christians. And by the way, these are not Christians like the devout monks that might come to our minds. No, no, no. It's not talking about those kinds of Christians. Many of those who are listening are from Christian countries. And so you will be familiar with those kinds of Christians who claim to love Jesus. They might claim to celebrate Christmas, but actually their lifestyle is one of complete dunya and materialism. They go to nightclubs and parties, they drink alcohol, they might take drugs, you often have pet dogs, and they have illicit premarital relationships, and that's completely normal for them. These are the kinds of Christians who raised Yazid. And even if we see that the historians are referring to those who raised Yazid as Christian, we should understand that these historians are trying to distance themselves to a certain extent and make it clear that he was in no way an Islamic figure from the onset. And so we see that Yazid loved dogs. He had lots of dogs, and he used to dress these dogs up in gold harnesses, and he used to race them, and he used to love hunting. And you may have heard also that he loved monkeys, and he was fascinated with monkeys. It was a fad that he was going through. It was his sycophancy. It was his love of the dunya, and we're going to come to that. But just to make it clearer what Yazid was really all about, think about a really rich king in the West for a moment, because that will help us to understand it. When I was younger, especially in England, we'd learn about the history of England and kings like King Henry VIII and Edward the Longshanks, and the terrible things that they would do. You know, they would murder others just so that they can secure their own thrones. And they were completely obsessed with perpetuating their love of wealth and dunya. This is truly what Yazid's religion was. Now, you might think, because as often is the case, when you try to envision Karbala and you try and think of this historical period, you think of everybody wearing turbans, you think of everybody having some sort of Islamic demeanor. Muawiyah, the father of Yazid, was much better at portraying himself as a Muslim. You have to understand, these were monarchs who were trying to take over the Islamic empire, and in order to do that, they had to present themselves as Muslims. Yazid, it's very interesting, he even criticized his own son. And he said to Yazid, "Oh Yazid, if you're going to keep on, you know, having these illicit relationships with dancing women and have all this music and alcohol and all of this lust and dunyawiism, and so blatantly expose yourself, it's not going to be politically clever for you to do that. You're going to make enemies." You see, even Muawiyah understood that Yazid was just too flagrant. And yet we see that when the blessed head of Imam Hussain alayhi salam is brought to the court of Yazid, he says something which would confuse a lot of people. He says to Sayyidah Zainab, he says, "Are you happy with what you saw your God did with Hussein?" Very bizarre for a person like Yazid to say. He says, "Are you happy with what your God did with Hussein?" In other words, he was implying that it wasn't me that killed Hussein. Allah is the controller of everything, isn't he? He's the one who killed your Hussein. Sayyidah Zainab replies with the eloquence of her father in that very famous line, "Ma ra'aytu illa jamila." I saw nothing but beauty. And there is so much to say about that sentence, but we're going to come back to that inshallah if Allah permits us in the future. But coming back now to Yazid, why did he say this? There were two ideologies which were prevalent at the time among the Muslims, the Jabris and the Mu'tazilites. The Jabris, they posited the claim that everything is controlled by Allah, and we have absolutely no free will. In other words, I'm just a puppet being controlled by Allah. The Mu'tazilites were the opposite. They came and said, no, Allah created us, but then he let us go. We are absolutely free. We have absolute free will. It was Imam Baqir alayhi salam and Imam Sadiq alayhi salam who later came and made it absolutely clear what the Shia school of thought says on this subject. And he said, Amrun baynul amrayn, it is a matter between the two. Now, I don't want to delve too deeply into that, but the point here is Yazid was simply saying this in order to hide himself, to clothe himself, but the reality of what he truly believed in is reflected again in the Holy Quran. There are certain people the Quran warns us about, and it says that these people say, "Ma anzalallahu ala basharin min shay'." And there are those who say, Allah did not reveal anything to any human being at all, meaning that they deny the revelation. They deny that any prophecy exists. This is the true faith of Yazid. And it only came to light after the head of Hussain alayhi salam entered into Sham, and he actually said this himself in a form of poetry. So what was the real deen of Yazid? It was his nafs. What was the God? What was he worshipping? It was his nafs. The Quran says, أَفَرَأَيْتَ مَنِ اتَّخَذُ أَفَرَأَيْتَ مَنِ اتَّخَذَ إِلَهَهُ هَوَى. Have you not seen he who takes his lower desires, his lust, as his God? You see, in Islam, we have 4 powers. Every human being has been given 4 powers. One is the intellect. One is anger. Anger is a power. Passion is another one. And imagination is the 4th. For every human being, Islam teaches us that the intellect should lead the other 3 powers. Yazid had all 4 of these powers. He was intellectual, he had intellect, but his intellect was governed by his lust, by his passion, by his lower desire. And so he would use his intellect, but he would only use it to feed himself, to clothe himself, to give him more, so that he could get all the gusto he could muster. And so we should draw a lesson from this, that look, we need to make sure that our intellect overpowers all of our other faculties. What was the mission of Imam Hussain alayhi salam? The mission of Abu Abdullah al-Hussain was, and all the prophets, in fact, all of the Imams, it was to save humanity from becoming the slaves of our nafs. Why? Because when we become the slaves of our nafs and our lower desires, in other words, when our intellect is not governing the rest of our faculties, and rather we are governing our intellect through our desire, we suffer, dear brothers and sisters, respected elders. Yazid suffered in this world, and he will suffer in the next. If you look at some of the sources, actually tell us that he died from consumption of alcohol. Some sources tell us that he, after the event of Karbala took place, he would be perpetually thirsty, and he would drink and drink and drink. And so his stomach burst, or his bladder burst, and it was from this that he died. Think about that. This is what the dunya actually is. Imam Hussain alayhi salam, one of the recommended acts for us, dear brothers and sisters, while we're in lockdown, is to go online, go and look at the maqtal of Imam Hussain. Just read it, see what the maqtal says, even the translation, see what it says. There is a very poignant line. Up until the very last moments, Imam Hussain alayhi salam is trying to guide even his enemies who are trying to kill him. One of the lines which brings tears to your eyes when you read it is, he was trying to warn them even when his throat was being cut. And one of the lines says, I'm not doing the Masa'ib now, this is just a side point, but it's a poignant point for us to contemplate over. He was trying to guide them, not for himself. He's not trying to save himself. He's already worn the shroud. He knows he's going to die. He's warning them so that maybe, even at that last moment, if they back away and they don't kill Imam Hussain, maybe they can be forgiven. And Imam Hussain alayhi salam wants to save them. And so it says that while he was in the middle of his sentence, they cut his neck. Furthermore, the head of Imam Hussain alayhi salam, when it is on the spear, the blessed lips of Imam Hussain alayhi salam is still warning the people. What is the verse which Imam Hussain alayhi salam recites? According to some of our hadith and some of our sources, it wasn't a verse about jihad. It wasn't a verse about rising up, which is what you'd expect. It wasn't a verse about vengeance. It wasn't a verse about the hellfire. No, it was none of these. The blessed lips of Hussain are reciting this verse. أم حسبت أن أصحاب الكهف والرقيم كانوا من آياتنا عجبا. Or do you suppose that the people of the cave and the inscription are from our wonderful signs? A very strange verse. And it's referring, and it's from Surah Kahf. Why? Ya Hussein, you could have recited any verse. Why this verse? You'll have to go to that surah and figure it out. Again, it's about intellectual discourse. The entire surah is about getting the human being to think, who am I? Where am I? Why am I here? Where am I going? Who created me? Why did he create me? What is knowledge? How much of it do I really have? All of it is about intellectual, aqli discourse. Hussein is still calling humanity towards that. The dunya from which Hussein and the Ahlul Bayt is trying to save us from is, as Imam Ali alayhi salam says, like seawater. The more you drink from it, the thirstier you will get. It is like a shadow. The more you chase it, the more it will run away from you. And if you turn around and run away from it, it will also chase after you. As Imam Ali alayhi salam teaches us, it is like a snake. It looks smooth, it looks beautiful, it looks shimmery and shiny, but inside is deadly poison. And so it makes intellectual sense for us to divorce it 3 times, like Ali alayhi salam did. Very quickly before we come to the musibah, the people of Kufa now, because there was more that I wanted to say, but we've run out of time. Umar ibn Sa'ad, we have to recognize that these were not like Yazid. They were not complete disbelievers. Umar ibn Sa'ad and people like Shimr, they were Muslims. Isn't that strange? They were Muslims, not only Muslims, but they were seen as the great scholars and ulama of the time. Not only that, these were the mujahideen. Shimr was on the battlefield. Not only that, you look at the sources, these are people who would recite Salatul Layl and recite the Quran in a beautiful way. They had even, to an extent, intellectually come to a rational understanding that Islam is the right path. And so they followed it. And yet they became among the asfala safilin, the lowest of the low. How? Why? How could this possibly happen? Remember that house of beliefs that we talked about? Sometimes there is a brick missing. That brick, which is missing, it leaves a hole in the house. And so what Shaitan does is he enters into our creed through that very hole. Intellect does not, if we've truly intellectually come to an understanding, and we don't just believe, but we know Allah is one. We don't just believe that Muhammad is the messenger of Allah, but we know he is the messenger. Then it leaves no room for doubts. But if a hole does exist, if a doubt does exist, then the dunya can seep through. And that's what happened with them. And I wish to delve into that, but unfortunately, we've run out of time. The people of Kufa now. So we've talked about why it's important to intellectually and rationally come to a conclusion. We've also talked a little bit about the enemies of Imam Hussain alayhi salam and what their faiths were. But now let's come to the Hosani camp. And let's try to understand what the Hosani camp really was all about and what their creed and their beliefs were through a comparison that we'll make with the people of Kufa. The people of Kufa and their example is terrifying for me. And it should be terrifying for all of us. Why? These were not just kuffar. These were Muslims. These were not just Muslims, but they were Shia. They were not just Shia, but they were awaiting the Imam of their time. And so we see that when they were weeping for Imam Hussain alayhi salam, Imam Sajjad alayhi salam comes to them and he says, "Are you really crying? But why are you crying? When you're the one," he was implying, "you're the ones who killed us." Let's envision very briefly their actions, the actions of the people of Kufa, compare it to the actions of the people of Karbala. And I'd like you all, inshallah, to visualize it with me. And through that, we will understand the differentiation between the two beliefs. In Karbala, the companions of Imam Hussain alayhi salam are gathered in the tents, and they say that it sounded as though the tents were full of bees because they were reciting the Quran and the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In Kufa, they were also reciting the Quran in masjids. In Karbala, the salah was established by Imam Hussain alayhi salam, and his companions are standing around him with shields, trying to stop the arrows which are being fired in his direction. In Kufa, salah is also being established, but it's being established in the comfort of their homes and their masjids. In Karbala, when the children are weeping and wailing of thirst, in Kufa, the children are being tucked into their beds. Think about the comparison now. Both of them are Muslim, both of them are Shia. But look at the difference. In Karbala, the companions go out into the battlefield to wage jihad, and they fall one by one by one. In Kufa, they're having religious gatherings and preaching the Deen. In Karbala, when Abbas alayhi salam's arms were cut, in Kufa, they are discussing whether they should speak out against Ibn Ziyad or whether they should do taqiyya. In Karbala, Ali Asghar's throat is pierced with the arrow. In Kufa, they are asking if it is the right time for them to rise up against Ibn Ziyad or not. In Karbala, Hussain alayhi salam is all alone, and he is asking for a very cheap cloth. He's asking Sayyida Zainab for a cheap cloth. Give me the cheapest, most worthless cloth, because I do not want the enemies to leave me naked in the battlefield of Karbala. Meanwhile, in Kufa, they are clothing themselves by what is perceived as piety and taqwa. Hussain, seeing there is no one left, cries out in his loudest voice, "Is there anyone to help me? هل من ناصر ينصرني But these words did not reach the hearts of the people of Kufa, and by this time it is too late. But these words they do reach the ears of the women of the tent of Abu Abdullah. They begin to wail and cry, hearing Imam Hussain absolutely alone. Sajjad alayhi salam stands and he falls trying to get to Imam Hussain at this moment. Kulthum takes him and finds him back in his room. Oh Sajjad, if you are slain, then we will have no more imams and nobody will be left to guide the people towards their intellect. Hussein is dressed in the Prophet's armor. He is wielding the sword of the Holy Prophet Muhammad, and under it he is wearing a worthless thobe. Oh Zainab, I do not wish to be left naked in the battlefield of Karbala. And they say that he tore these clothes more so that maybe when the enemies see it, they will not snatch it from him. It is at this point, they say, that Rabab brings little Ali Asgar to Hussein. He holds Ali Asgar in his arms and he kisses the child's forehead and he kisses the lips of Ali Asgar. And I can't translate what Hussein says to Ali Asgar. And then he takes Ali Asgar to the battlefield and he says, your quarrel is with me. What has this child done? He holds up Ali Asgar and he holds him up, and then the arrow comes and pierces the throat of Ali Asgar. He throws the blood into the skies. Imam Baqir says that not a drop of that blood fell back down. Hussein says the thing that makes this less difficult for me to bear is knowing that Allah is watching. After burying Ali Asghar, Hussein looks at all the graves of all of his companions. They have all gone and they are all buried, and this tiny grave of Ali Asghar. Hussein then rides out to fight. Back broken Hussein, alone Hussein, thirsty Hussein, heart shattered Hussein. He strikes down anyone who dares to approach. He parts the crowds as Musa parted the ocean. They are attacking him from every side. Zainab and the women are wailing and crying. Hussein cries out that death is better than humiliation. He charges at the flank. They say at this point, one of the people who was witnessing what is taking place that day, it feels as though it only happened yesterday. He says, never have I seen someone surrounded by enemies in such huge numbers, who has lost his son, who has lost his family and companions, and they've all been slaughtered, and yet he fights completely unwavering and with full composure, relentlessly and courageously. And he says that men kept fleeing in front of him whenever he would charge at them. At this point, Umar ibn Sa'ad insults the Imam, and then he commands them to fire arrows at the blessed Imam. Some of our sources say that the impact of the arrows was so great that Hussein falls from his horse. Ya Muhammad, this is your grandson now in the battlefield of Karbala. This is what your Ummah is doing to him. Hussein says, if you have no Deen and you do not believe in the hereafter, then at least believe in being free. Even now he is trying to save them from the great crime they are about to commit. They pounced at him and he fought back. Arrows are coming at Hussain. Spears are coming at Hussain. Swords are striking at the blessed body of Hussain. It is intense fighting. Intense heat has struck the Imam. And so he is suffering from an intense thirst. It is said that Shimr mocks Hussain, and he says, look at the surface of the river, look at how it shimmers and it shines. You will never taste of this water, O Hussain, until you enter into the fire. They were determined to kill Imam Hussain while he was thirsty. Oh, Hussain, is there no one to help you? A child comes running from the tents as Imam Hussain falls to the ground. And he clutches onto Hussain and he says, I will defend Hussain. And the cursed ones kill this child. Ya Rasulallah, when you left this lowly dunya, your head was in the lap of Ali. Oh, Amir al-Mu'mineen, when you left this lowly dunya, you were surrounded by your Ahlul Bayt. But here is your son Hussain, with Shimr sitting on his chest and slitting the throat of Hussain. Ya Fatima, Ali buried you secretly in the night, yet there is no one left to bury Hussain. They pounce on the body of Hussain. They take his shield, they take his helmet, they take his armor. They snatch every last thing from the body of Hussain. They cut the rings from his fingers with their swords. And then the cursed one commands, trample the body of Hussain. Trample the body of Hussain. وَسَيَعْلَمُ الَّذِينَ ظَلَمُوا أَيَّ مُنْقَلَبٍ يَنْقَلِبُونَ. I'd like us all to raise our hands in prayer. And there's only one very important prayer that I'd like us all to make tonight. And that prayer is this, that when the Imam of our time rises, make us among those sincere servants of Imam Mahdi who are willing to absolutely sacrifice everything in his way. And when Imam Mahdi raises the banner of Ya Latharat al-Hussain, we have intellectually comprehended the religion of Islam so that we are able to give everything in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. الصلوات معا الفاتحة.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم. إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون وذم قضائه تسليم لأمره